So in our last video we modeled this base Igor. He's pretty low poly, and as far as I can tell he's only got like one triangular point where we had to adjust his hand. We could have done this differently, but for now this will work out. So what I want to show you is we could work with this as a base mesh, but because of how it's created, there's going to be some issues trying to turn it into something a little bit smoother and something that we could animate. So basically the first thing I want to show is, like, if we took just this mesh and we just wanted to do some quad draw on it. If you hold down, and now I'll bring up the keyboard shortcuts for quad draw so you've got those. If you hold down Control, it allows you to insert additional lines or additional edge loops in the model. So if we just go and start clicking in order to try to, because we're going to need a lot more detail in the face. Excuse me. We'll see after we do a little bit. You notice how the edge loop carries around the body. That this is a good edge loop, because it actually, what should happen is eventually should end up a sort of something similar to like a mask of the face. One more for the eyes. One more for the face. Probably something for the back of the ear. And you see here where we have these shoulders, there's a big stretch in the chest. Not that it's a huge deal, but you'd like to have a little bit more geometry there. Same thing. So one of the things you're going to see is we've got this issue in the mouth that there's no, I mean, this could be an edge loop right here, but you can see where the edge actually carries around the face instead of wrapping around the mouth. And we have this issue right here with the where the opening for the mouth would be, that the lines don't actually continue to the edge. We could create a triangle there, but when we go to do subdivisions and things like that, that may cause issues. I mean, we could work with this, but I'd rather show you the retopo method for building from this, rather than have to go, because you can tell, even though I've added all these extra lines, it's still square, so we have to go and push and pull all of these different vertices in order to get a more organic shape like what we have and what we're trying to model. So I'm going to just reopen the file. So you can go to recent files. I haven't saved anything, and I'm just going to open this Igor base again. Don't save. And we're back to what we had at the start. And the first thing we can do when we go to start modeling this thing and we want to do a retopology on it is we can use the sculpting tools up here as a way of organically modeling this thing in a more sculptural, sort of ZBrush-like way. First thing we want to do, though, is we want to get a lot more geometry in this thing so we have something to sculpt. So I'm going to go ahead and, with the mesh selected in the window, click on Smooth, and he rounds out. And you can see where, we have some weirdness, little pinching in the geometry, but it's fairly smooth. There's plenty of geometry along the arms, especially since his arms are fairly skinny. And there's a fair amount of geometry in the face. What we're going to do is we'll crank it up 3, do something like 4. See what that looks like. Yeah, that should be enough to get a rough shape going that we can then do a retopo on. If you check the hands, you can see where we had the triangle, we got this little intersection here, and this is one of the reasons why triangles are problematic, but it's not this, you can still see now it's quads, it's not a triangle, so it's not going to be that big of an issue. And because it's on the top of the hand, and the hand doesn't really, the top of the hand at least doesn't really flex much, that won't be problematic. Alright, so we'll go Q to leave it, select those subdivision levels, and Then in Sculpting, with the Sculpting tab, if it's on polygons or something like this, just click on Sculpting. We can start to sculpt this mesh. So the first thing to start out is to get, when we smooth this thing, it got fairly round. So let's use the grab tool, click on that, and you'll see now that we have this ability to, and because we have mirror for the grab tool set for object X, and we can scale this down a little bit. You can see we can grab and pull points on the model now, more like clay. One of the things that might help too, though, is if you go under Display on the tool settings, if this is an up, you can click on the hammer icon over here on the right to then select Display and say Orient Brush to Surface. So now when we we roll our brush around, we can see that where it's positioned and how it's rotated in terms of actual size. So or facing on the shape, the topology. So let's go ahead and pull out sort of an ear shape, and all I'm doing is just sort of like pushing and pulling to get a little, we can make the brush a little smaller now, in order to pull out the top of an ear. And then if while you're in this move tool, if you hold down Shift, you'll see the cursor changes, and we can smooth out the modification that we just did if it gets a little bit rough, which is useful. Alright, so let's go to the side. Just pull that. We can pull the back of the head in more for the shape of the ear. You'll see where we've created sort of a divot for that. Smooth it, hold down Shift, and just drag across. Can go smaller on the brush a little bit. Yeah. And then start pulling out a rougher shape of the ear. It doesn't have to be perfect. We just want to have some sort of a placeholder for what the ear should be in terms of where it should be. Pull that in. Smooth it. Pull in some more. Smooth. Pull out. You can start to roughly shape the ear. If you go too big on the brush, just undo what you've done. We don't want to get like all the details of the ear, because we can always go and push and pull that. I mean, we could. It might help in terms of having something to work with when we go to do a retopology, but for now that'll work. And you can see he's got this sort of dog ear. If you look at the image, how it's sort of got this pointy dog or pointy ear shape. So we'll grab this tip, pull that out, and tuck his earlobe in a little bit more. And it looks like he's got this sort of like fold in the top of his ear, more like a dog ear. So we will make the brush smaller, and the brush sizes that you'll have to use will depend on the actual size of your model in general. So this isn't a size relative to any size model, because I've scaled this model up fairly big, as we talked about in the last video. This brush size, it gives me more ability to sort of fine-tune the brush. Something like that. Smooth. He's kind of got kind of a clay face. I mean, this was a stop-motion puppet in the actual movie, so he's going to be fairly rough. It's pretty good. Let's make his ear a little less pointy. He's kind of looking a little too bad-eared. That looks good. Then let's work on his nose or his face. So we have this kind of an upturned bat nose again. Pull that out. Something like that. It's looking good. And then from the side you can see his mouth goes straight down and then kind of his overbite. So we'll pull. Just if it gets too rough, smooth it out. Go with a bigger brush sometimes for big modifications. I like to work big and then slowly go smaller. Let's make his eyes, pull back a little. So we're going to probably model him with his mouth open at first, and then we'll close it before we actually go to rig him. Let's do his chin, pull it down a little bit. So, pull his lip out. His chin doesn't have this wide chin, it's very pointy. He's got a bit of a double chin. His cheeks are very round because he's a chubby. And that's the thing, is when we did the smoothing, it actually thinned up the whole model a lot. So we're going to end up having to kind of push and pull to get this thing wide again. At least as wide as he was. That's pretty easy to do with this drag brush. Let's make it bigger, and we'll just make his head. Pull it out. Starting to look pretty good. Let's get smaller. Pull out the lip. His nose should come in a little here. His eyes, I should say. He's got pretty deep set eyes, and they're going to end up being dark. Pull his eyebrow down, and then up here. Smooth it. Let's pull his ear in there a little bit. Nose can come in, the bridge of the nose should come in a little bit. It's looking pretty good. His eyebrow should come out here more at the front. Probably raise up a little on the side and come back. And apologies for the phone in the background. Okay. We'll go with a smaller brush to sort of, not that small. Yeah, something like that to sort of pull in the mouth shape. We just want to get a basic outline of what his smile would look like. And obviously this is really rough. The smaller the brush gets, the easier it is, especially with a detailed model, to make some pretty rough looking edits. But what you can do is you can always hold down shift and then run that back across to smooth it out, so that you can slowly clean it up. Maybe it's best if we just go a little bit bigger and pull the lip down like that, in order to create that ridge that we want to model against with the retopology tool. He's got kind of a hard lip down here at the bottom. Doesn't have to be perfect, especially for this particular stage of the model, because we're going to we just want more of an organic rough shape of his head, and then we can hard model retopo against that. It looks like I'm losing his forehead. He's got this rounded forehead and his eyes are too high, so let's go bigger, pull him down. A lot less harsh. Pull his forehead out, smooth it. And the back of his head also should go wide. Now eventually this will end up being hair, but when you want to do big edits, make the brush a good fair amount bigger so you can just pull the whole shape out. So one of the things you see is when I get to the back of this head and I start to move this, I'm also moving his hump. I may or may not want to do that. One of the things we can do to fix it is to set the object, the sculpting tool, to allow for the topology. So constrain to surface. Whoops, that is not what I wanted. That's when we're modeling against something. Let me figure out which tool I'm looking for. Direction, screen, fall off perhaps. Okay, so type is surface volume. Do surface. And you'll see I can pull the head back into the hump or the hump into the head without affecting the other, because it's only following the topology of the surface then, which is what I want. So pull this head up a little, kind of square it out. We're going to bring this hump and make it a lot bigger and wider. We can narrow it on the arms here, along the waist, smooth. Pull it up to the side. Gotta be careful about the shoulder if we go too big with it, because we're going to end up thinning his shoulder and kind of tucking it in, which is won't kill us, but you don't want to mess up. We worked a lot on the topology of the shoulder and where to place it in the previous video, and if we end up skewing this around too much, it may cause problems. It looks like if you look at the shoulder attachment, it should come up closer to the ear right now. Well, I mean, his head, we could obviously suck it in again later, but or move it down with after rigging, but the shoulder should probably be a little bit higher. So for that, we're going to go with a bigger brush and pull it up. You got to be careful here to make sure you do the entire, keep the arms as straight as possible. It doesn't matter if it's a little bent, but because I mean, actually T-poses usually have a little bit of a downward slope because the extremes of his motion, you want to account more for flexing here in the shoulders or in the pecs and less at the top of the shoulders, because that's, you're not going to be animating his arms over his head that much, and they're pretty skinny anyway, so it's not like it's going to kill it. It's starting to look a little better in terms of the location. We should be able to pull his hump pretty tight into the back of his head. It's almost like he doesn't have a neck coming from behind. It's looking good. Make sure, so we've got some weirdness here in the arm. Let's move the whole thing up. This is okay. We can always, we'll clean this up when we go to retopo and make it low poly again. We'll pull it back in. Or we could even just paint it, because you can see in the model that we're looking at, there's really not much depth under the sleeve anyway. It's just a hard edge. So we already have more detail than the model has. But okay, let's see. Somehow we're losing the roundness under his mouth. And the roundness of his forehead. He's got kind of this bumpy forehead. It probably just needs to go wider here. Something like that. Starting to look pretty good. Let's pull his up. Yeah. And his cheeks. There we go. So he's got this sort of ring around his face where his cheeks are, curves. This is a Tim Burton kind of style thing where he creates these, it's almost like he's meant to model for stop motion because it looks very foamy. Get that there. Okay. I'm just trying to imagine the shape of his eye. So his cheek will come out a little bit here. Smooth it. Looks okay. If you go to the top, and you should always look at the model from all sides. There's a little weirdness here. The hair would probably cover that up, but for now we're going to fix this. There we go. And you have to play around with the brush size to get it to work or be appropriate for whichever area you're trying to edit. Let's go ahead and pull his chin in a little bit and his upper mouth down so we give him more of an upper lip. Chin in. There we go. And we'll give him more of a double chin. Pull this all down. That's looking good. You can see he's got a bit of a smile line here, so what we can do for that is if we get a little bit smaller brush and pull that lip in and then grab this top and pull down over, tuck it in at the side and then pull the cheek like that. Take a little bit, it's like a tucking type of maneuver. Then, yeah, we'll go this, pull that down, give them some jowls, because this is where the jowls will come from, is over the smile line, over the cheek, and then down. There's always this, like, if somebody's sort of heavy, they're going to have a little bit of a side, and this happens as you get older too. There's going to be a little bit of a jowl coming down over the chin. I mean, he's just a kid in the movie, but he's meant to be modeled after a famous actor, which I should know the name of, but I can't remember. And point the nose a little bit. Tuck his eyes this way and then pull the nose bridge wide to give him more definition there. So one of the things I'm noticing is his eyebrows actually up here. There we go. And his eyes will tuck into, his eyebrows are pretty thick up here, and then he's got this eyelid, sort of upper eyelid, and then his eyelids. So it's looking good. Pull the side of his face out here just to kind of create the hole for his eyes. Let's go small and we'll pull this up. Create a harder edge on his lip. Pull him down. Smooth it. I must be running up against some sort of, let's go, topology issue here because I can't seem to quite get this to pull in the shape that I want, but that's okay, we'll get there. So one of the things that you don't see in this model right now his lips are kind of tucked under, but in some of the pictures I've seen from the character in the movie, he can extend his lips out quite a bit and create sort of almost a duck bill type lip shape when he's saying things like ooh. So what we'll do is when we go to do the retopo, we'll add a lot of edge loops around his mouth and create that ability to shape his lips using blend shapes for the animation. Pull this in. We'll end up modeling his mouth in the actual retopo. We won't worry about it for now. You could model it here, but gets into some issues where we're going to end up, because of the topology, if we pull the mouth in too much, we don't have a whole lot of detail here to move in, but if we pull it in too much, then we'll end up having trouble trying to edit it internally, whereas if we just model, if we retopo the face, then we will just leave an edge loop here, and then we'll go and do some extrusion modeling, like the way we box model this general shape to create the shape of the mouth using lower poly. Since it's going to be internal and it's mostly dark, it'll be okay. Alright, so we've got his head pretty shaped. We can worry about modeling the hair after the fact, and so he's got this weirdness in his shorts we can fix real quick. Make the brush a little bigger. Just pull out and then push. Smooth. Not sure how that got introduced, but what we can do is, brush is too big. Pull with a smaller brush just to kind of get rid of this little weird line shape. And then smooth it. Helps. Same thing on the back. You could also introduce, start to put wrinkles in using the same technique, the same way we made the face shapes. But we won't do that for this base mesh because, like I said, he's pretty low detail. Alright, let's do his hands. He's got spidery fingers in the model, but I'm going to want some more realistic sort of shapes to his fingers just to add a little change to it. So one of the things that we can try is there should be an inflate tool. Let me find it. Pinch, grab, let's relax, flatten. This is foamy tool. Let's just take a look and see what that does. Yeah, nothing. Though that may work for making his finger a little bit wide. Let's make the brush small. Nope, too much distortion. try the opposite of pinch. If you hold down Shift, Control, yeah, there we go. So you see how it's making, now one thing we can do is we can select Control, see how it thickens his thumb out a little bit, especially here on the end. You can make that joint a little bigger. And you can do that to create fatter like joints. So I'm doing it for his knuckles. Make his fingers a little bit fatter at the end. Let's try look. If you do view, look at selection. It's only apply. Oh, because I'm doing this on the topology instead of the surface. It's only applying on one side. So again, we can go back to this. Oh wait, that's surface volume. Yeah. So you could do it on just volume instead of surface, and it'll do the entire model. That, whoops, I'm pinching instead of pushing. So Control, see how it's moving it across based on the width of the brush. It's pretty subtle, but oops. Need to make the brush smaller. This may not be the best way to go about this. Let's see. Now I've added a line there when I was pinching it. Let's try adding an elbow to him. Oops, again I'm pinching. Hold down Shift. Yeah. And again, like, we're working on the base mesh still here, so it's not going to be a huge issue if we, let's go like 0.7. 0.5. There we go. So now if I hold down Control and just work on this, I can really create like a big knuckle there and there. So I'm just inflating these to kind of accentuate the fact that there should be a surface or a bone sticking up at his joint there. I could do the same thing on his wrist, where people tend to have a little raised bone on the side. Fatten his finger up. Same thing on the top here. The joint. It's a way of sort of marking where the fingers bend. When we actually go to the retopology tool, we will model the geometry to have these flexy joints in the fingers, but for now, it's probably pretty good. You can run this along the bottom of his hand. Let's make it bigger. Not that big. I think I'm flattening it actually. This tool. Imprint, wax, scrape, amplify. That's probably what I wanted. Let's see. Try it on the thumb. No, I can't tell what that's doing. Let's crank up the strength and just see. Seems to be just sort of amplifying the detail that's already there. There should be a tool called, anyway, we can go back to just grabbing, pushing and pulling. to thicken it up. It's really not that bad anyway, so. And he does have some spottery fingers. Let's go smaller, back to 0.5. And I'll just pull up some knuckle joints. And you can flatten some fingers, some tops for the fingernails. You can pull out the bottom. Kind of hard to know what to do when he's got fingers this sort of fat. Or long, I should say. But he's going to have some long fingernails. One of the things, too, is all of his fingers are the same size, which could work for this character, but we may want to just leave it on surface and then increase the brush size so that when we select this finger, we can shorten just it, since it's the pinky. And we could also like fan his fingers out a little bit so it's easier to rig later. And this one's going to be shorter than the middle finger too. And we could have changed this in the base mesh as well, but just to sort of show you that this setting your fall off to surface really helps make some edits that would be hard to make otherwise. Alright. Pretty good. And the last thing we'll do is we'll sort of fatten his feet back up. And you can see where his feet, because they rounded out, have sort of moved off of the floor. But that's okay because he kind of curves up here at the base anyway. Make the brush smaller, pull off the tops of the shoes. It's pretty good. One of the things we could do is we could go ahead and model the outline of his socks here, just so we know where they're at. So to do that, we will take the Sculpt tool, make the brush something like 1, and not too much. Go way down on your strength. I'm just making it a little bit wider all the way around to create that outline. And then we can go back to our move tool and grab and pull the shape up to create that harder edge line. Same thing from the top. Pulling the edge. We can do the same thing with the shoe, the edge of the shoe. Just pull the ankle down into this sort of loop. You got to create kind of a wider base and then pull the top parts down into it. and that starts to give you sort of a hard edged line for what you can make into a edge loop. Okay, and then give them some pull out the edge, the top. Something like that. Let's give him I'm just pulling and smoothing. Alright. Let's straighten the sock out. Alright, so now we have these symmetrical socks, and if you look at the model, one of them's lower than the other and one of them's higher than the other. So we could actually just go and turn off mirror and make our brush a little bit bigger, and then pull one sock up like that, and then make it a little bit smaller and pull the other one down. And the one that's down should also go a little wider because it's fallen off of his sort of gathered at the ankle. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Okay, I think that's a good place to stop for this particular. And let's make his belly a little bit bigger. He's got like more of a belly and hang out. So let's make a big brush. Make sure we're using the move. Yeah. Grab the front of his belly and just sort of pull it out. And the same with the back. Actually, make his hump come out more. And then this will curve in. Move his legs a little forward. Let's see how that looks. Not bad. Oop, I had symmetry turned off, so I only did it on one side, which is okay too, but undo, turn on mirror on the X, and we'll do it again. Actually, we'll do it over here. Go back a couple, sorry, where we had turned off symmetry. When we start to modify, yeah, it looks good. Okay. But that could also be like how we move the hump over to one side. In fact, I'm going to do that. I'm going to just make it a little bit more off. And we can always turn symmetry back on and it'll just work after. Let's make it a little bit bigger on one side, smaller on the other. And we'll turn symmetry on. Object X, and then we can do the belly and the back more. Okay, we'll make sure his belly's rounded. Move it up. Probably can pull this entire chest a little bit more forward. Starting to look pretty good. We'll work on this. Alright. So anyway, now we have the organic shape, and what we can do is start to retopologize it. Just to give you kind of a preview of what we'll do in the next video, let's go ahead and select the object, make it, using the magnet tool up here, set it to be the surface that we're going to draw our quad draw from the modeling toolkit, select quad draw, and then we can start to draw points across the shape where we can then go and create our edge loops. Something like that. And if we wanted to turn on X-ray, you can sort of see then your shape. He's not, it could work. Something like that. You could quad draw that way. You can hold down tab and draw from here, or you can extend. You can draw an edge loop like this. And because we have our object set to be live, and that's what we're modeling against, then it just sort of draws the new topology across the surface. But we'll go over that in the next video. Let me undo. Let's turn off X-ray. And we'll cover that in the next video. But for now, save your file as Igor. Save scene as Igor instead of base. We'll call it Igor base sculpt. And then we can come back to that later if we wanted to do something else with it. In the next video we'll cover, like I said, this quad draw retopology tool, and that's where we'll actually start to get the final object that we'll work with.